welcome to our show, The Awaited, which is dedicated to coming to understand the Imam of our time, alayhi salam, better. And my guest today is Sister Amina Inloes, and today we're going to be exploring the figure of the Mahdi alayhi salam in other narrations of other schools of thought, the Sunni schools of thought. How is he depicted, and how does that compare with the school of Ahlulbayt alayhim salam? Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you for being here. We know that traditionally in Sunni schools of thought there has been some acknowledgement of the Imam, or that there will be a Mahdi. We know there are differences with the school of Ahlulbayt, but also there seems to have risen also a branch that says that there is no Mahdi, that this is just a fabrication. So first of all, I mean, I remember when I was practicing, the Sunni madhab, that the Mahdi was something quite abstract. Like occasionally you might hear from people who might have some interest in the figure of the Mahdi that there is a Mahdi, and it's something that you would sort of say, yeah, one day, inshallah, someone will come to bring justice, and that was about it. It wasn't really kind of the focus that of one's practice that it is in the school of Ahlulbayt alayhim salam, and there's very much a focus more on looking back and reviving the so-called golden era, rather than looking forward and anticipating a golden era, which is what we find in the school of Ahlulbayt. Why is it that this has arisen in Sunni schools of thought, that okay, he is mentioned, but there doesn't seem to be kind of this idea of preparing for him, or there doesn't seem to be this sense of imminence that he's coming?
I agree completely with what you're saying, although historically scholars from the Sunni school of thought have generally spoken of the appearance of the Mahdi, with of course some slight differences, but nonetheless discussing this concept. I do find there is a general silence about it today. Now, of course, there's some exceptions. One cannot generalize for all of the millions and millions of people who ascribe to the Sunni school of thought. But in general, I would say a lot of people who follow the Sunni schools of thought really don't know that there are predictions of someone called the Mahdi. Yeah. Or they might just hear about it once or twice in passing. And of course, I should mention there are exceptions. There have been people who declared themselves the Mahdi over the century, not just people who were ascribing to a Shi'i school of thought. There's plenty of Sunni or Sufi people who did that. Also, there's a few books. Harun Yahya, for example, has written extensively about this. I understand there's mixed views about Harun Yahya. I'm just saying that he wrote a book, more than one book, actually.
I actually noticed he's actually relied on some Shi'i texts, though, for that as well.
That's quite interesting. Well, I don't want to start critiquing his book, because I've noticed he doesn't always go to the primary sources when he's writing. Right. But I do find it interesting that he's also referring to Shi'i texts. But I'm just pointing it out as an example of a book which has been popularized on the topic. But I think in general it's not a topic that's discussed too much. And of course some people might say, well, so what? If the Mahdi is supposed to come in the future, we're not in the future right now. Yeah. But I do think there are some reasons why, even in the Sunni schools of thought, where there is not the belief that the Mahdi has already been born, it is important to discuss it, if I can offer my humble opinion. One of them being that the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't say things aimlessly, as Allah Ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, مَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. He didn't just say things to say them. There's many things about the future that he did not predict. And yet there are certain prophecies that he did leave behind for the future. So we have to assume from the fact that he spoke about these future incidents regarding the Mahdi and Akhir Zaman in general, that he spoke about them on several occasions. We have to assume that there's a reason why we should know about them. And I think one of the reasons is something that you find in many of the narrations. I wouldn't say many. You find it in some of the narrations from the Sunni 6 books, the primary books of Hadith. And that is when the Holy Prophet ﷺ is doing dua or advising people to do dua to seek refuge from the Dajjal. which is something I think even in the Shi'i school of thought we don't do on a regular basis. Oh Allah, I seek refuge from the Dajjal. But this is something that is narrated, thus indicating that if you're going to be seeking refuge from the Dajjal, first of all, you should know about the Dajjal. And I would say that the Sunni books of hadith do put more emphasis on the Dajjal and predictions about his characteristics and actions and so forth than they do on the Mahdi, although there are hadith on the Mahdi as well. But also, you should also know who is the Mahdi. As I mentioned, there have been a number of fake Mahdis, and clearly it's easy to be misguided if you don't have any idea of what is predicted. So these are just some very simple reasons why I do think it's important, both in a Shi'i and in a Sunni context, to discuss the Mahdi. I would add, just building on what you were saying, and I think it's actually remarkable that you were presented with the concept of the Mahdi in a Sunni context as the bringer of justice, because I'm not even sure that much is always said on a popular basis. But I think it's helpful to remember that we as Muslims, we do all have the same beliefs about the figure who will emerge at the end of time, and that one of his primary responsibilities is to bring justice and prosperity to the earth, and to bring harmony and peace to the earth. We sometimes have so many arguments with each other about political matters or ideological matters, and I think it's important to remember that ultimately we've got the same goal, and I think the figure of the Mahdi does unite us in that manner.
And I mean, I have also seen now some people, some Muslims, who say that they, you know, up until sort of recently, perhaps it has been part of the, you know, the aqidah or the belief, the pillars of belief, that, you know, that Muslims believe in the Mahdi alayhi salam, that he's going to come. But now there are some groups that are saying no, it's all rubbish, and Sunnis who believe have this belief in the Mahdi are misguided as well. So I mean, have you heard of these groups, or why would this arise?
I can't say I've personally heard of entire groups that hold this view, but I've heard it from individuals. I think it's more of a layperson's view, a popular view. It's not something you hear that much from people who are genuinely educated in the tradition of the faith. Even historically, you find it once in a while among things that are related in the Sunni school of thought, but it's not the normative view. I would add, even among some authors who perhaps are coming with writing about Islam without having engaged in traditional Islamic studies, I've noticed that a couple of them who've decided to write books on the Sunni hadith have dismissed this stuff as Shi'i fabrications, which is really, it's quite surprising, because this is not at all the typical view of the ulama. But I think this is just a sort of popular misconception, because when we go back to the early Sunni scholars, it is clear they acknowledged the concept of the Mahdi. Even if we go to the 6 books, the Sihahu Sitta, the books that are given the most importance in the Sunni tradition, not to say there aren't other books, incidentally, this gets forgotten sometimes, but when we go to these books, some of the compilers named sections of the book Kitab al-Mahdi, so the chapter on the Mahdi. Clearly they wouldn't have done that if they didn't think there's legitimacy to this idea, and of course they put hadith in these chapters too. So that shows the importance of the topic in early scholarship. Now I would say, incidentally, I'm not going to try to cover over things. I'm 100% certain that there are fabricated hadith about the Mahdi, both in the Sunni books and in the Shi'i books. And one of the main reasons that you can say that is there are contradictory hadith. How long will he live? Will there be more Mahdis after him? Will he live to the end of time? Will someone else, etc.? But that doesn't mean that every single hadith is fabricated. It just means there are some hadith here or there on the topic which are not reliable. But that's no different to any other topic in Islamic studies in general. And there are hadith, both in the Shi'i and the Sunni tradition, which the ulama do consider to be strong or sahih hadith, also Hasan, sort of the next level down. And you find these in the 6 books as well. Additionally, there's a rather normative view among Sunni scholars that even if a number of the hadith about the Mahdi in their books are considered weak, it's interesting to note, and this is purely from a Shi'i perspective, that they've actually considered some of these hadith weak because they suspect one or more of the narrators might have been Shi'i. God forbid, let's reject their hadith. But even setting aside those narrations, they point out that there are so many narrations about the Mahdi, in the Sunni sources again, I'm not talking about the Shi'i sources, that it forms what they call tawatur.
Yep.
Now, those of you who've been watching the exciting shows on the ahadith know what tawatur is, but just to remind those of you who haven't been watching so diligently, that means there's just so many narrations about the Mahdi related that it's not possible this could be a fake idea, even if specific narrations might be weak. Maybe specific details about the shape of his nose, for example, may not be authentic, but as a whole, the entire idea couldn't have been fabricated because there's so much material. I would add one more point too. Everything I've said up till now is my official refutation about why the idea of the Mahdi is not a Shi'i fabrication. It's also very strongly rooted in Sunni scholarship as well. But I would add that even when we look at the 1st century Hijri, so very close to the time of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were people who were being put forward as false Mahdis. I'm not going to name names, but it happened. And I would venture to say that although these people were not the Mahdi, I'm not saying they were, the fact that there were Sahaba alive at the time, so there's companions of the Holy Prophet, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him and his family, and this is still very close to the prophetic period, and no one got up and said, well, what is this weird idea of the Mahdi? The question was, is this man the Mahdi or not? Not where did this idea of Mahdi come from? Then this suggests that indeed it is an authentic idea. Now, of course, some people might say, well, it could have been a pre-Islamic idea. And yes, it is a pre-Islamic idea. I'm not aware of very many faiths that don't believe that a savior will come. It's one of those fairly universal ideas. We do expect someone to come towards the end of time who will bring good to the earth and to see the victory of good over evil. So yes, it's a very pre-Islamic idea, but of course it's also an Islamic idea. But I would also add along those lines in that the narrations we have do very clearly distinguish between the Messiah, which one might discuss in a more Christian context, or the Masih, and the Mahdi. They are very clearly portrayed as separate figures. So I think that in and of itself does point to the fact that this clearly is an inherently Islamic idea and not some sort of false idea, as some people have the misconception today.
Thank you for that. That's interesting that even, well, obviously in the time of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him and his family, people were talking about it, and I even saw in one book that's been come out of Arabia that it was saying, I think some people even thought that Muawiyah was the Mahdi as well at the time. There were ideas that perhaps it might be him. So, but there are also kind of misconceptions about the Mahdi, and I suppose, of course, from other schools of thought, Sunni schools of thought, they will say that the school of Ahlulbayt has misconceptions. But what sort of conceptions are there about him?
I suppose there's two ways we could be defining misconceptions. One is differences from the viewpoint in the school of Ahlulbayt, which of course some people might have a different opinion. And then there are genuine misconceptions about what is in the Sunni tradition. So I'm going to look at the latter part right now. One of the things you sometimes hear in circles pertaining to the Sunni brothers and sisters is that the Mahdi is not in the Quran, not referred to in the Holy Quran. Okay, now I'll grant the fact that there is no ayah that I'm aware of that says Al-Mahdi will come at the end of time. If you find that ayah, let me know. I'm not aware of it. But there were early scholars who felt that the Mahdi is referred to in the Holy Quran. I mean, Sunni scholars. And what's interesting is that there appear to have been some efforts to sort of cover this over in the modern era. I'm not saying 100%, God knows best, it could have just been an accidental omission. But for example, I found this interesting situation the other day. I was having a look at Tafsir Ibn Kathir. Now, this is not the #1 verse I would personally like to choose to discuss the Mahdi, but this is the verse he was referring to. So in Surah Al-Baqarah, there's a verse that says, "Who is more unjust than the person that forbids people to go worship in the places in which Allah is worshipped, in which Allah's name should be celebrated, the person who wants to ruin them. It's not fitting that these people should enter these places except in fear." And then the latter part of the line, or the ayah, is the most important. "For them is nothing but disgrace in this world and in the world to come, and exceeding torment." That latter part, disgrace in this world and disgrace in the world to come, we can understand why the enemies of Allah would be disgraced in the world to come, but we see many enemies of Allah who are not disgraced in this world. They go and bomb this mosque or church and bulldoze them left and right, and no one does anything to them. So some early scholars were of the opinion that this verse refers to the Mahdi. When he comes, he will be victorious, and the side of religion and right will be victorious. Now, one of these early scholars, not the only one, but one of them is a very famous scholar who I just mentioned, named Ibn Kathir, who wrote his famous Tafsir Ibn Kathir. So I was reading along in the Arabic edition. It says very clear, Al-Mahdi. You can't get clearer than that. And then I had a look at the English language version that gets circulated. And lo and behold, that part was just missing. And you wonder what happened. Does the author feel like Ibn Kathir made a mistake and he just had to sort of edit his work? Or why would there be this sort of concern? So unfortunately, even though these things are discussed in classical texts, that's not always apparent to everyone. And we may come across some more examples of that today as well. But I would just add, in addition to that, and this is not a misconception about what is in the Sunni sources, but this is, again, I'm getting more into my own School of Ahlulbayt opinion. One of the things you notice about the Mahdi in a lot of the hadith in the 6 books, in my opinion, I feel that he's portrayed as a warlike figure. The focus is on fighting and armies and killing. And I'm not questioning that we have prophecies that there will be great battles at the time of the Mahdi. You know, I'm not questioning that. But when you get rid of hadith that we consider to be fabricated or weak anyway, the Mahdi, according to the narrations from the School of Ahlulbayt, is not really portrayed as someone who's just coming to kill the people of this city or that city, but it's that he has to fight because there will be the Dajjal, the Sufyani's been around. There's going to be people who are going to be attacking him. That's why we need the soldiers of the Mahdi. But he's not portrayed as a warlike sort of figure. And I think this is not a small point, because we know Islam nowadays has this reputation for being extremely violent. It's quite sad. It's unusual that, I mean, as a Muslim, I don't see Islam as a violent religion, and yet this assumption is all over the news. And having these sorts of narrations about the Mahdi be very prominent in some works, I think it gives a lot of fodder to some of these people. For example, I mean, I'm sorry to say, but some fundamentalist Christians, for example, who write these books about the Mahdi is the true Dajjal and so forth, or I saw a fiction novel sort of combining political fantasies about Iran with the Mahdi by some man who's not a Muslim, and it allows them to abuse the idea of the Mahdi.
Okay, thank you. Well, some fascinating discussion there, and inshallah we are going to continue after the break. You're watching The Awaited. We'll see you again after the break. Assalamu alaikum.